Hello, I'm Charlie Plumb, and I want to welcome Courtney and Kirk Turner. And we're here to talk about the ever-changing landscape for employment law and employment issues that you're facing and as it evolves. And those issues have evolved as fast as our COVID-19 emergency has evolved. And I want to talk a little bit about what sort of action McAfee Taft has been taking. First, we've created and are constantly updating a COVID-19 resource center on our website and encourage you to take a look at it. It's being updated as we get new guidances and new information from the Department of Labor and as we address new questions that employers are asking. Another step we've taken here at McAfee Taft is we've created a COVID-19 response team really designed to provide recommendations and advice to employers as this landscape changes. So we're available to you if we can be of any assistance as you face challenges on a day-to-day basis. Since our video last week, we've had a new law passed. Congress passed the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, and that Response Act has two components. Number one, it has a COVID Paid Sick Leave Act, and number two, it has a COVID Emergency FMLA Act expansion, which expands employers who will be covered under the FMLA and also expands what employees are going to be eligible for that COVID-19 emergency leave. The law will be effective April 2nd, 2020. It's actually in effect, we think, right now, but you have to be in compliance no later than April 2nd. And as written now, the new law is set to expire on December 31, 2020. We are at a point right now, it's hot off the presses. We're getting some guidances, a little direction from the Department of Labor, but what we're really awaiting is a complete regulatory format that'll really tell us the nuts and bolts of how some of this works. So we're giving you our best advice right now based on what the law says and the kind of issues we're seeing and working with employers. But certainly, when those regulations are issued, we're going to be updating this video. We'll be updating our website. And again, the McAfee Taft COVID-19 response team is available to you if you find that of value. A couple of other things to keep in mind as Courtney and Kirk work through these new laws with you. Your existing leave policies or your existing PTO policies, they remain in effect. They're not changed. In other words, what Courtney and Kirk are going to talk about are above and beyond what your policies already provide. And keep in mind, your regular FMLA or standard FMLA policy remains unchanged. It's also in effect, even though there has been an emergency expansion for COVID-19 issues. Now, Kirk, why don't you start our employers off and talk a little bit about this paid sick leave, this COVID paid sick leave, and that component of the new law. And as a starting point, please explain what employers are going to be covered by this new law.
Yeah, it's a great question, Charlie. First question is coverage. We have employers that have less than 500 employees are covered by this law, and there have been lots of discussion about why large employers are not being covered. We are guessing that the reason is because the government doesn't want to reimburse them for the types of expenses that these smaller employers are going to be reimbursed for. But it covers every employer from one employee to up to 500. And if you have more than 500, then you are not covered by this particular act.
Okay. Excuse me. Go ahead, Kirk. I'm sorry.
And then there's also, just want to say, there's no exemption in this area for paid sick leave. And we've got really two different areas. Courtney's going to talk about this expansion of FMLA. I'm going to focus on paid sick leave. There is no exemption for smaller employers. That everybody is covered under this particular law.
Okay. So tell us next, if you would, for COVID paid sick leave, what employees are eligible for that paid sick leave under the COVID law?
Yeah. And again, we're only talking about COVID issues. If it's not a COVID issue, if somebody just has a health condition, general health condition, you're under your old FMLA stuff. But as it relates to COVID issues, it relates to all full-time and part-time employees. There is no got to be there a year. There is no you got to work 1,250 hours. It is any employee who works for you, either full-time or part-time, they are covered by this Sick Leave Act.
Okay, so let's assume our viewer is an employer who's covered, and they have a full-time or part-time employee who's working for them. Under what circumstances is that employer required to pay them this COVID paid sick leave?
Yeah, so there are 6 circumstances under which pay is required, and we're going to break this down into 2 different categories. The first 3, and you'll know why this is important as we go along, but the first 3 relate to the employee's own health condition, their own COVID-related condition. That is, that the employee is subject to a federal, state, or local order requiring quarantine or isolation due to COVID. Secondly, that the healthcare provider, their doctor, their healthcare provider, are advising them to self-quarantine or self-isolate. And then thirdly, that the employee is experiencing COVID symptoms and is seeking medical diagnosis or care. So
in those first 3 categories, we're really talking about a group in which the employee is personally suffering from COVID symptoms or has been directed by either a healthcare provider or a governmental agency to quarantine or self-isolate.
Right.
So what's the second group? You said there were 3 more categories.
Yeah.
That's a second grouping then?
Right. And then the second grouping, and again, this is the level of reimbursement that you're going to be available to you is different under these 2 scenarios. The 4 to 6 are the employees caring for someone subject to an order or advised to quarantine or isolate. So it's their child, it's their parent, it's someone that they're caring for. The employees caring for their child when a school has closed or child care has become unavailable due to COVID precautions. So school stop and we don't have child care issues, then that may be a paid sick leave opportunity. And then broadly catch all other circumstances specified by the Secretary of the Department of Health. And so that's, again, any additional information. As we know, this thing is rapidly changing. We're going to get new issuances, new guidance, new orders. And so anything that might be available in that regard.
Okay, so now next step for me is for employees that are eligible and they're in one of these 6 categories that qualify for leave, how many hours of paid sick leave do they earn?
Right. Full-time employees get 80 hours, up to 80 hours. It's not 80 hours just paid. It's up to 80 hours subject to the COVID conditions. So they are entitled to receive that sick leave. And then part-time employees, you essentially average what the employee is working on a weekly basis. And so if they were working 20 hours a week, Charlie, then they would be entitled to 40 hours of sick leave protection under this particular new act.
Okay, now with that 80-hour rate or some pro rata for the part-time person, at what hourly rate or what day rate is that paid sick leave paid to the qualifying employee?
Yeah, so it's their normal rate of pay, so their normal hourly rate, their normal salary, up to a cap, and so we pay their rate up to a maximum of $511 per day, and that also is the reimbursement rate that the government is going to allow or is going to repay the employer for that particular illness. And there's a maximum total for that particular employee of $5,110.
Okay, and what about and that's for what category of leave?
Yeah, I didn't. So when we were talking earlier about these 2 different categories, 1 to 3 and 4 to 6, that category, $511 a day, applies to categories 1 through 3. So it relates to the employee's own serious health condition. If they're out because of their own health condition, then they're entitled to be reimbursed up to $511. The employer's entitled to be reimbursed up to $511 per day. And that's the maximum that they would be required to pay an employee on a daily basis.
Okay, and that's for myself. I have to quarantine, I have to self-isolate, or I'm showing symptoms.
Right.
Okay.
And we would also say if the employer makes the decision that the employee, they've returned from international travel, or they've been on spring break and the employer is concerned about having that person in the workplace, then we believe that the application of this sick leave policy would apply there, and that the employer should be paying the employee at those particular rates.
What about the day rate or the cap rate if it's not the employee's own condition or isolation, but it's one of those last three categories you mentioned where they're caring for a family member or perhaps childcare issues with the closure of a school or a childcare facility?
Right. So the rate is different. The rate for caring for someone is capped at $200 a day. It's up to their normal hourly rate, their normal salary rate, but capped at $200 a day for reimbursement. Now, obviously, the employer can pay more if they choose to, but in terms of seeking reimbursement for the government, there is a cap of $200 per day, or a maximum aggregate total of $2,000. So, again, that's for categories 4 through 6, caring for someone, or schools closed, or healthcare is not available in terms of caring for their children, childcare. Then those things would be available in that circumstance.
What sort of right or ability does an employer have when they're facing an issue? An employee may or may not be entitled to paid sick leave under the rules of the road you've just told us. Do I have any right as an employer to say, hey, Kirk, I need to see some documentation?
Yes, you have the right to ask for documentation. What we're not clear about, and those of us that have lived in the FMLA world for the last 30 years, we know that we have certain forms, that we get certification, that we get information provided by the employee that certifies that the employee is. We don't have those forms in this situation. We might get them. The Department of Labor may issue them, but at this point, I think we just get reasonable documentation from the employee that indicates that they have a need for a sick leave covered by this particular statute.
Well, and one of the points I think is important with this new law, this law is intentionally, its intent is to assist and benefit employees and their families getting through this rocky period from an economic standpoint. So I think your point, let's be reasonable, let's be flexible in both our documentation requests and granting paid sick leave, or granting Courtney the family leave we're going to talk about. I think that's very important. We shouldn't lose sight of the fact that this is an emergency act intended to benefit our citizens and help them keep their head above water in these tough times. So this is not the time to nitpick or be overly technical with these needs. Do you all agree with that?
Completely agree with that. The policy's pretty clear. We're trying to help as many people as we possibly can through their employers.
Yeah. And I think you err on the side of in favor of the employee in all of these circumstances.
Now, Kirk, you've been making mention as we've gone through this COVID paid sick leave about reimbursement that the employer may seek. Tell us how, and I know it's a little gray right now, but how are employers supposed to weather this new and additional expense are going to occur in terms of paid sick leave?
Yeah, so we just got some guidance on this, and I'm not a tax lawyer. You need to talk to your tax consultant.
I would emphasize that part. Kirk is not a tax lawyer. Hopefully, you'll talk to a McAfee and Taft tax lawyer, but whatever you do, talk to a tax lawyer. Okay?
I am absolutely not a tax lawyer, and I am not giving tax advice, and whatever other disclaimers I can give to you at this moment, I am providing to you. But we do have some guidance from the Department of Labor that was issued on Friday, and Courtney's going to talk more about this, but it allows, as I understand it, an offset against what taxes you will be paying. In other words, you're not going to go file a return and then they're going to reimburse you for it. You're going to be able to actually in-house offset this money. And I'm going to read what the Department of Labor says, so I'm not giving tax advice, but it says the payroll taxes that are available for retention, that means you retain, include withheld federal income taxes, the employee share of Social Security and Medicare taxes, and the employer share of Social Security and Medicare taxes with respect to all employees. So it's not just the employee who is sick. It is all employees that you are withholding those sorts of taxes on, and that you can use that money to offset against what you're paying to these sick leave. So it's going to be a benefit, hopefully, very quickly. And then if you don't have enough money to cover all of those expenses, then there's going to be an accelerated process through the IRS, which again, the release says that you would be able to apply, and their commitment is to try to get those paid within a 2-week period.
You know, a great point you make. This is going to be, for some employers, is going to be a very significant expense. So rather than trying to seek reimbursement, the mechanism that Kirk's describing, where you get to offset it on some of your other tax obligations, is very beneficial. Kirk, no offense, but I did want to tell our viewers right now on our COVID-19 resource page on our website, we have current articles and advice from our tax and benefit lawyers on the issue of reimbursement. And hopefully it'll be the same as yours, okay? We can only hope, okay? So let's hear Kirk set us straight on COVID, paid sick leave. Courtney, bring us up to speed with this new emergency FMLA expansion, if you would, please.
Sure. So what happened here is basically we've established a new reason why someone can take leave under our existing Family and Medical Leave Act to address issues that may arise specifically because of COVID-19 and the impact that it's having on childcare and schools.
Okay, so this is an expansion of a FMLA, but it's childcare specific.
That's correct.
Okay, so what employers are covered under this new FMLA COVID expansion?
Well, it's a departure from our usual FMLA threshold. So here it's the same as Kirk just talked about with paid leave. Employers with less than 500 employees are subject to this act. The 50 employer threshold does not apply here.
Okay, so more employers are going to be covered. Those with 50 or less that wouldn't be covered otherwise. Is there any recognition of problems small businesses might struggle with?
Yes. So one thing that the Act specifically addresses is the fact that the Secretary of Labor will have the ability to issue regulations, and we're expecting to see a small business exemption, meaning that a business with 50 or fewer employees can apply to the Department of Labor for an exemption from the Act. You'll have to show that the financial impact will be such that it will affect the going concern of the business. It could jeopardize the business in and of itself.
And I know some of our business and transactional lawyers are monitoring that very, very closely. And when those regulations and those guidances that Courtney talked about, seeking that exemption for small businesses, we'll have that information on our COVID-19 response page as well. Okay, so we've got more employers covered. What about employees? What employees are covered by this emergency COVID FMLA expansion?
Well, we've got more employees covered too,
Okay.
Because this particular provision would apply to anyone that's worked with you for 30 days or more, regardless of the hours that they've worked. If they've been with you for 30 days, they're eligible to take leave potentially under this act.
Are there any exclusions that the Department of Labor can recognize, certain groups of employees that aren't necessarily entitled to this expanded FMLA
This is
coverage?
interesting. So the Act itself says that employers can choose to exclude healthcare providers. They can make that decision. But it also says that the Secretary of Labor is going to have the power to come in and specifically exclude healthcare providers. So if we've got folks that our government thinks need to stay in the workplace, they're going to carve those people out in the regulations that we're expecting this week.
Even if a particular medical or health facility chose not to carve them out, the government could step in.
That's right.
Okay.
And that would be healthcare workers like working at hospitals and also maybe first responders.
That's exactly right. And it's the same definition of healthcare provider that you're used to under the FMLA itself. So
Right.
the regulatory definition still applies here.
So you said at the outset, Courtney, that this is a specific type of expansion for a specific type of absence. When or under what circumstance can an employee ask for COVID FMLA leave?
If you've got an employee who is dealing with a school closure, a child care closure, and that closure in and of itself is going to keep that employee from working or from teleworking, then that employee can request this type of FMLA leave.
Okay. And what's the duration? In other words, what's the total number of work weeks under our expanded COVID FMLA leave an employee can seek?
So this has just been integrated into the FMLA itself. And so there's still a total of 12 weeks up for grabs here. What we've learned from the DOL release that came out just last night is that the paid sick leave that Kirk just talked about will run concurrently with this FMLA leave benefit. So if somebody takes the 2 weeks that's paid, that counts against this particular FMLA leave entitlement, leaving them with an additional possible 10 weeks, depending on the need.
We talked to Kirk about this. Let's ask you the same question. What sort of documentation or information can an employer request from an employee to establish their entitlement to the COVID FMLA leave?
Well, you get to get something.
Okay.
You can ask for something and get something. I'll tell you, this is a topic near and dear to my heart because we found out on Wednesday that the daycare that my family uses is closed for at least 2 weeks. And we got a text message, a Facebook update, and an email. And presumably any of those would work in this situation. Like you talked about before, this is not the time that you want to really dig in your heels and maybe be unreasonable about the type of documentation you're requiring.
So you have an employee who is eligible. They've got a child care issue that entitles them to COVID FMLA leave. Is that COVID FMLA leave paid or unpaid or a mixed bag?
It's a mixed bag. So the first 10 days are actually unpaid. Now, they may run concurrently with the paid leave that Kirk just talked about. Once those first 10 days of leave are over, if the need continues, then we'll go into a paid leave situation. The employees are going to be paid at 2/3 of their regular rate, up to, again, $200 per day, a maximum of $10,000 per employee. And also, employees have the ability to use any accrued paid time off under your other existing policies that predate COVID-19. They have the choice to use that also.
And is that the employee's choice or not?
It has to be the employee's choice. The employer cannot require them to do that.
Yeah, one of the things we're going to talk about at the end is policies or communication to employees. And I think a lot of employees are going to want to make that decision for themselves, but they have to be told that is an option for them. I mean, many of our employees are living paycheck to paycheck, and they can't go with 10 days without pay for groceries and rent and that sort of thing.
That's right. And one thing that we didn't talk about when we were talking about paid leave is with the new paid leave benefit, employers cannot require their employees to use other accrued leave that they may have first.
That's right.
The employees get to use that paid leave immediately and first before using up any other leave that they may have.
So we should have some documentation around the employee electing to use PTO or vacation, whatever they have, as part of this process, for sure.
Well, and I think if you think about the purpose of this law and what's going on in our country right now, the advice I'm giving right now is when people have different examples that involve employees with accrued unused PTO, my general advice is as long as it's the employee's choice, their free choice to use or not use, you're probably not going to go wrong as long as you're leaving it up to the employee. You all agree with that?
I agree with that.
Totally. Yep.
So our standard FMLA, we have this job protection feature, my ability to come back to work, my same or equivalent job if I don't burn 12 weeks up. How about in the context of this COVID FMLA leave that has to do with my child care needs or loss of child care needs? What sort of job protection rights are there for me in those circumstances?
Well, the rights differ based on how many employees an employer has. So an employer that has 25 or more employees, job protected, just like what we're used to under the FMLA. So for an employer that has less than 25 employees, it may not be job protected leave. If the employer can show that the position no longer exists at the time that the employee is ready to return to work, and it doesn't exist because of some type of economic reason that's related to the COVID-19 pandemic, then the employer can not restore that person to work, but has to continue to keep that person in mind for a year following the date that the employee would like to return to work, and presumably keep reaching out where if a position ever becomes available, this employee would kind of get first choice if they're available to work at that time.
Not necessarily the exact same job, just any opening.
Same concept that we're familiar with under the FMLA, an equivalent, the same or an equivalent position in terms of pay and benefits.
Okay. And I think that's with the hope that after we get through this emergency that businesses will be ramping up, and we need to keep our eyes and ears open for people that have lost their jobs in the meantime.
Right.
And that limitation only applies to employers with 25 or less employees.
That's right.
Those with more have our same substantially similar job, same pay, same benefits.
That's
right?
exactly right.
Yeah.
I want to talk about a question I got Friday, and I think many of our viewers may be facing this: the situation where you have an employee who may be entitled to paid sick leave, may be entitled to this COVID FMLA expanded leave, and has some accrued unused PTO, for example. Courtney, how do you think those three things interplay?
Well, it's not a new concept for us to have to manage different types of leave at the same time. And it's not different here. It's just new. So what we would do is we would have to immediately extend the paid sick leave that Kirk explained to us. We know that for a fact. The act is very clear. That's available for immediate use. Can't be postponed, can't be delayed in any way. And we know from the guidance that we just got that that's going to run concurrently with this new FMLA leave benefit if it's needed. What we expect, and perhaps we'll get some additional clarification when we get the new regulations, is that to the extent that our employees have other forms of paid sick leave, vacation, PTO, your standard sick leave policy, our thought at this point is that they'll continue to be able to use those to supplement when they move into this extended emergency FMLA leave. They can supplement the 2/3 pay in order to increase to 100%, no more than 100%, but 100% of their salary. Again, we'll get some confirmation of that, we expect, but for right now, I assume that that's the way we'll be handling this going forward.
And we may have situations where people still, after exhausting the paid sick leave, after exhausting the extended COVID FMLA leave, they still have some accrued PTO, which they could tack onto that
That's
as well.
right. It doesn't go away. Whatever leave policies you have now are sort of frozen in place. You can't erode them. You can't backtrack on them because the Department of Labor will consider that to be bad faith under the new act. So they're locked in. Whatever they've got now, they've still got. They just may have some new leave entitlements on top of that.
Kirk, today's Sunday, March 22nd, as we're filming our video here today, you, Courtney, and I. What should our employers be doing right now when it comes to the COVID-19 emergency and the kind of employment issues they're going to be facing?
Yeah, I think communication is the key here. Communication with your employees. We need to be candid with them. We need to be open. We need to be flexible, but continuous communication with them about where you're at and what we're doing. You got to have processes in place from a human resources perspective and a compliance perspective in terms of being able to navigate through this sick leave issue and the financial piece of that, as well as the expanded FMLA that Courtney talked about. You need to get your questions answered. We have developed this COVID-19 response team, so we're receiving really hundreds of inquiries daily on different questions that are coming up, and we're trying to help our clients navigate through these issues and get the answers that they need, so we're available to you to do that. And then I think lastly is just policy development to make sure that we are communicating clearly what our commitment is, what our good faith efforts are to comply with the act. Your policy development is going to be really important about clearly communicating and having compliant policies. We're also helping our clients develop those sorts of policies in order to ensure compliance with the act.
Courtney, you've been fielding a lot of questions and issues the last several days from employers. From that experience, what sort of direction or what sort of guidance would you provide our employers?
Yeah, sure. I think the employers that are doing a really good job right now are the ones that are staying up to date. They're reading a lot. They're signing up for every governmental alert possible. They're staying in the loop. They are asking questions. They're identifying gray areas and trying to figure out their way through that. They're also keeping in touch with their workforce. Even if you don't have a plan now, you're letting people know that. So you're letting people know we will be in touch. We are putting together a plan on how we're going to address this. They're also taking it sort of day by day. Through this date, we anticipate this, or we're going to institute a work from home policy and we're going to continuously reevaluate it to know what to do next. There's a lot of development of multi-phase strategies here, right? None of us know how long this is going to last. So I'm seeing a lot of employers that have a short-term plan, while at the same time they're thinking long-term about how are we going to cope with this if it is into the end of April, if it is even longer than that.
Well, both you and Kirk make the same strong point. Communication with our workforce is going to be critical. It's going to be challenging during this time period. So Kirk mentioned, again, our McAfee Taft COVID-19 resource page on our website. One thing we have posted is last week's video, which gives very practical kind of day-to-day issues you may be facing with employees. So please refer to that if you find it helpful. We're going to be continuing, as we've told you, updating and providing alerts as this moving target progresses, as we learn more with you. on what sort of recommendations or thoughts we can provide. If it will be helpful, we'd certainly invite you to sign up to some of our alerts. Again, our intention is to be really on the cutting edge and be ahead of the curve on as much of this as we can, and we'll get through this together. Courtney and Kirk, I want to thank you for your time and your great guidance, and for you all, thank you for viewing. Be well and be good to one another. Thank you.